Welcome to Tossing Grenade the Windmills. Windmills.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm afraid I don't have any particularly interesting or new news today. Having said that, if I'm going to make a pitch for something, I would highly recommend checking out the audio book of High Midnight, which is a Western spaghetti with ghosts and Mexican wrestlers and knife-throwing chimpanzee, or bonobo, I forget which. I think it's bonobo. So, yeah, actually it is definitely a bonobo. Anyway, by a friend of mine, Jack Babylon. So, check that out. Oh, it's also the audiobook is voiced by another friend of mine, Bernie Clarke. So, or is that Bernard Clarke? I forget what he goes by professionally. Anyway, I'm going to start reading. Precyber by T.C. Ricks and Ken Leitner. Chapter 47. Che felt a bit confused when Ernesto got excited reading Clarke's email. How is this a good thing? Doesn't this mean less money and more hassle? Che asked. Ernesto looked up at Che with a glint in his eye. Ah, I know something you don't know. Which is? Che hated it when Ernesto played these games, but he put up with it because otherwise Ernesto would pout for days. Ernesto was no puto, but he occasionally sighed or had a pathetic puppy dog look in his eyes that drove Che nuts, and Che's patience was low. Guess. Ernesto had just crossed the limit. Che threw his magazine in Ernesto's face. Cut it out, moron! Ernesto suddenly assumed a business-like mannerism. The two of them might get banter about stupid stuff, but they took money matters seriously. Simple. We've got another offer to haul people on the way back. Now we have enough room to accept it. How many? 3. This is a small crate. There's no way we're going to be able to fit for all of them to be able to fit. 4 is the most we can possibly hold. Ernesto grinned. Yes, I know. That's the beauty of my plan. Which is, we get Clarke to do our work for us. Che sighed. He knew Clarke would need convincing. Che hoped Ernesto... Che sighed. He knew Clarke would need convincing. Che hoped Ernesto could manage it without violence. I hate this plan, Clarke said while looking angry enough to spit at Ernesto. Do I look like one of your employees? Hey, Ernesto threw up his hands defensively. First of all, you let your companion get himself killed. You said you should not have to pay for his full passage back. That's fine, but we have to make our money somehow. The revolution had to save money wherever it could. Clarke considered paying for with his own funds, but he didn't have enough. He barely had enough to pay a reduced rate to take Horse's body back to the States. Gabriel had refused to cover the expense. Gabriel had a revolution to win, and sometimes forgot about the feelings of the people working for him. Ernesto kept bombarding him with excuse after excuse. And then there's the fact that we will help you. We're helping you, Clarke. Think about this as our contribution to the cause. What? Even Che looked a little askance at his brother at that moment. Well, the thing is that we'll offer you guys a discount in the future if we don't have to ride with you. You've seen what we do to keep the crate running. If you can prove yourself on this trip, we'll give you guys a reduced rate each time you ship someone. So you'll be saving the revolution money. Clarke really wanted to shoot Ernesto at this point, and mentally felt himself grabbing his gun. Che tensed visibly, and Ernesto seemed as relaxed as ever. At that point, Clarke let it go. He had seen enough death and enough killing to last a lifetime. Fine. Clarke gave up more from exhaustion in the face of Ernesto's sheer insane enthusiasm for this stupid idea than anything else. Clarke took the body and went into the crate. He would have to give up a few crappy souvenirs that they had picked up along the way to make space. Clarke had grown attached to a ridiculously large stuffed burro after Horse died. Horse had bought it for a girl who had shown no interest, so Horse just kept it. Now the vaguely horse-shaped thing reminded Clarke of his lost friend, and would certainly take up too much room in the crate. Clarke took a swig of whiskey. He could understand the appeal of alcoholism in that moment. What a long, strange trip it had been. He looked at Horse's body and the poor stuffed burro one more time and lifted the glass. Vive la Revolution, and slammed the remainder down. The minute the three new clients showed up, Che began to have second thoughts. There was something about them that made Che realize that they were a better class of criminal than he. Everyone had heard stories about the last war, of course, but most of the real burnouts kept themselves in the ruins of VA hospitals or had offed themselves a long time ago. These guys were no burnouts. They were cinders, low and subtle, just enough lingering heat that there was a thirst for violence, and they cared little for who or what got hurt in the process. They were true predators, and Che had seen their like only a few times in his life. He let Ernesto do the talking. Ernesto said, "You guys got money?" The first nodded and handed Ernesto the bolivars. Otherwise, he said nothing. Ernesto just kept talking for him. "You guys have another passenger, but he knows now how to run the crate." The leader looked at Ernesto, frowned, and said, "If there's any funny business, we have friends that will find you." Ernesto had expected the threat. Everyone had heard human smuggling horror stories. The stories made entering this business hard. Reputation meant everything. Without it, few people would trust you. And Ernesto and Che had only begun building that reputation. Ernesto threw up his hands. Of course. You don't need to worry about us." The leader just looked at him and motioned for the others to follow. They all went onto the ship and into the crate. Even Ernesto shut up until the boat sailed out far to sea. Then Che looked at Ernesto. So what's your plan to get us home?" The stupefied look on Ernesto's face told Che all he needed to know. Che swore and threw a nearby chunk of wood at Ernesto's head. Clarke looked at his new bunkmate with inward trepidation, but he swallowed it all. These guys did not strike him as the kind with whom it would do to show weakness. He just maintained things on the crate the way he had learned on the way down. Idly, he wondered if they would kill him to prevent him from witnessing whatever they were planning. Clarke did not know, but he supposed if people did that kind of thing all the time, there would be a trail of bodies. After all, look at how much trouble 2 dead bodies had brought to Barfman's killer. Of course, Clarke had no desire to risk finding out. He kept his head down and focused on getting home. The evidence was too important. The first 4 days went without incident. Clarke found some reading material in the crate and spent most of the time reading or sleeping. But on the 4th day, Clarke decided to go outside and freshen the water supply. The bright outdoor light hurt his eyes at first, but after adjusting, his mind woke up as if from a fog. He cried. Clarke had grown close to Horse. They worked and trained together almost all the time. Clarke had shown Horse new tricks on the computer and some fighting moves that he had learned from the FBI. Horse, in turn, trained Clarke into breaking into places and blowing them to pieces. Clarke had numbed himself to the loss at the time, but now Horse's death hit him like a ton of bricks. Clarke didn't know why. Of all the recent deaths, this was the one that affected him the most. Perhaps he had never really allowed himself to get close to his friends until Horse. He did not want to dwell on it, but unfortunately had little else to think about. Clarke's mind wandered to his explosives training. He remembered Horse spending hours with Clarke, explaining the nuances of various bands of fertilizer and their suitability for bomb making. Apparently, Horse had bungled an assignment once by using industrial-grade fertilizer. He'd obtained some fertilizer meant for use in crop-dusting aircraft. It came as a fine powder, which farmers mixed with water in order to use with sprayers on the aircraft. Clarke knew that powdered fertilizer was, in fact, very explosive, so he had to listen intently to why it had failed. Horse had explained that he had placed 400 pounds of the fertilizer in a trunk of a stolen land yacht, gas-burning car. He had set a detonator and walked away. However, the end result had been extremely hot car fire with no explosion. You see, Clarke, the fertilizer didn't have enough air to explode. Only the outer layers could burn. Right, thought Clarke. The dust in the air explodes. He remembered from FBAI school the bomb needed three things: fuel, air, and a source of combustion. The densely packed fertilizer would have no air. Now, home-use fertilizer is made in small beads to time release over the season. Those beads packed together leave enough space for the air, but the home-use fertilizer is a weaker concentrate. Horst had continued to explain, except for Verde Lawn Products, new seed starter. That particular brand has the highest concentration of nitrogen and the correct shape for bomb making. Clarke laughed. He didn't just chuckle. He laughed maniacally while he stood over the cargo container and cycled fresh water into his living quarters. The brothers had soundproofed the containers, so Clarke's roommates never heard any of it. If they had, they would surely have killed him. Clarke put the hose away and returned to the container. He walked slowly while he tried to regain his composure. Clarke had grown hard over the last year. He needed the release of emotion, but now he easily put the pain back into the hidden part of his brain. On returning, he found his new roommates playing craps on the floor. He crawled into his little cramped bedding area and started to read again. He managed to stay awake for all of 5 minutes. His outburst had left him exhausted. Clarke awoke to hear Horst talking about Verde Lawn Products. Horst was trying to calculate how much fertilizer he would need to blow up a public park and kill everyone in it. Only some guy with a Latin American accent kept arguing that it would not fit in a van. Horst countered that they needed metal nails around the outside to increase the killing range. Clarke remembered Horst's death and realized both voices, not just one, spoke with a Colombian accent. He'd heard Verde Lawn Products mentioned again and realized his mind must be combining his dream with reality. He sat up, more awake than a few minutes ago. "Did I hear you mention Verde Lawn Products?" asked Clarke. His two container mates startled and looked at him. Clarke instantly regretted opening his mouth, but a drowsy mind lacked good judgment. If he admitted to overhearing the wrong thing, Clarke knew these guys would kill him. "I just had a friend with a small garden, and he swears by that stuff," Clarke lied. The two guys laughed and said, "Sure, gringo, it works miracles on cocoa plants as well. But my friend here likes Paulus brand better. Have you tried that one?" Clarke had not stepped in a garden center since age 12. He had no idea whether Paulus brand existed or not, but he was pretty sure these guys were testing him. He had to think, was Paulus one of the mass market brands, or had they made it up? Laban had a huge garden. What had he bought? He could almost picture the stack of fertilizer bags in the corner, but he could not remember the name. Clarke stalled. My friend grows cannabis. My friend grows cannabis, so he tells me all this stuff, but I'm not really into it like him. I just remember him mentioning that one brand. The guys eyed him suspiciously, but did not reply. They just stared at Clarke. Think. What did Laban have stacked up? Was it Paulus? No, it was something close. Paulus? Peters? Potters? Yes, it was Potter's brand. Clarke stammered out, Paulus, I don't think he ever mentioned that brand, though I do remember him talking about Potter's brand. Yeah, he used to use that one. I think it's a big brand, but he liked Verde better for starting new seeds. The two guys both smiled, and one said to the other, You see, my friend? Potter's brand sucks, just like I told you. Clarke decided now would be a great time to hide. He got up, walked into the back of the mini bathroom, tucked into the corner of a cargo container.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
and Red Anvil Amalgamated.
To fight the forces of evil!